Welcome to Tale Grove, where every story grows roots, and every lesson touches the heart.
The evening air outside La Belle Maison carried the quiet elegance of wealth. Inside the restaurant, soft piano music floated gently through the room, blending with the low hum of conversations and the soft clinking of crystal glasses. Warm golden lights reflected off polished marble floors, and every table was dressed with white linen and fresh roses. It was the kind of place where billionaires closed deals, celebrities celebrated success, and every detail whispered luxury. For Naomi Carter, it was simply another long shift. She moved gracefully between the tables, her black uniform crisp and professional, a small notepad tucked neatly in her hand. Naomi had worked at La Belle Maison for nearly 2 years now. The regular guests knew her as the calm, polite waitress who never lost her composure, even when dealing with the most difficult customers. But tonight had already been exhausting. One table had complained their steak was too medium. Another guest had snapped their fingers impatiently when their wine took longer than expected. Naomi had smiled through it all, the same polite smile she had perfected over the years. Just a few more hours, she told herself silently. Then you can go home. Across the dining room, the front doors suddenly opened. A group of sharply dressed men stepped inside, their confident laughter cutting through the calm atmosphere. The hostess immediately straightened her posture. At the center of the group was Jordan Whitmore. Even people who didn't follow business news had heard his name. At only 32, Jordan was already a billionaire tech investor. His companies had been featured in magazines, and his bold personality made him a regular headline in financial media. But tonight, he looked less like a businessman and more like a man enjoying the power of attention. "Reservation for Whitmore," he said casually, adjusting the expensive watch on his wrist. The hostess nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Right this way." Naomi watched from across the room as the group was led to one of the restaurant's most prestigious tables near the window. Mrs. Chen, the restaurant manager, approached Naomi quietly. "Table 12 is yours tonight," she said softly. Naomi followed Mrs. Chen's glance and immediately recognized the group of wealthy guests settling into their seats. She took a slow breath. "All right," she thought calmly. "Just another table." Grabbing a menu, Naomi walked toward them with her usual professional smile. But as she approached, she noticed something in Jordan's expression when his eyes landed on her, something subtle but unmistakable. A smirk. And for reasons Naomi couldn't yet explain, that single expression made her feel that this table was going to be very different from the others. Naomi approached table 12 with the same calm professionalism she brought to every guest. Her posture was straight, her expression warm but composed. In places like La Belle Maison, first impressions mattered, and Naomi had mastered the art of making every customer feel welcome. "Good evening," she said politely, placing menus in front of the guests. "My name is Naomi, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Most of the men barely looked up. One of them nodded absently while scrolling through his phone. But Jordan Whitmore looked directly at her. His eyes slowly scanned her uniform, her name tag, and then her face. The faint smirk Naomi had noticed earlier returned, sharper this time. "Well," Jordan said, leaning back in his chair, "this place does know how to keep things interesting." A couple of his friends chuckled quietly. Naomi kept her expression neutral. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked calmly. Instead of answering her question, Jordan picked up the menu and glanced at it for only a second. Then he looked at the men around him and spoke again, but this time, his voice changed. He began speaking in French. "Regardez ca," he said with a mocking tone. "Ils pensent vraiment tu comprendre ce que nous disons." One of the men laughed immediately. Another leaned closer, replying in the same language. "Bien sûr que non. Elle prend juste la commande." Naomi stood still, pen hovering above her notepad. To the other guests in the restaurant, it probably sounded like nothing more than a conversation in a foreign language. But Jordan's tone carried something else entirely, something sharper than casual conversation. Jordan looked directly at Naomi again and continued in French, louder this time. C'est amusant, he said with a grin. Ils embauchent un import que maintenant. His friends laughed again, more openly this time. One of them added another comment in French that made the table burst into quiet laughter. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. But her face remained calm. Years of working in restaurants had taught her one important skill: never react too quickly. Instead, she politely asked again, "Would you like something to drink while you look over the menu?" Jordan didn't answer right away. Instead, he exchanged amused looks with his friends. Then he leaned forward slightly, speaking slowly in French again, as if enjoying the performance. J'ai pari tu n'as aucune idée de ce que nous disons. Another round of laughter circled the table. Around them, a few nearby diners had started to glance over, sensing the uncomfortable energy building. But Naomi simply nodded and wrote something down on her notepad. Inside, however, a quiet thought crossed her mind. So, that's how tonight is going to be. Still, she didn't say a word. Not yet. Jordan leaned back comfortably in his chair, swirling the glass of water Naomi had just placed in front of him. The soft piano music continued to play in the background, but at table 12, the mood had shifted. There was a tension in the air now, one that Naomi could feel, even as she stood calmly with her notepad. Jordan glanced at his friends, the corner of his mouth curling into a confident smile. Then he began speaking in French again, this time louder, making sure Naomi was close enough to hear every word. "Regardes la," he said casually. "Lse tient la comme s'il comprenait quelque chose." One of the men beside him chuckled. Another leaned forward and added, "Peut-être tu penses que parler français rend les gens plus intelligents." Laughter spread around the table. Naomi's pen moved slowly across her notepad as if she were simply writing down an order. But the truth was, they hadn't ordered anything yet. Jordan continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "Je me demande combien ils la payent pour sourire comme si tout la nuit," he said, glancing up at her again. "Probablement pas assez pour apprendre un vrai langue." The men burst into louder laughter this time. A couple at a nearby table briefly looked over, sensing something uncomfortable in the air. But they quickly returned to their conversation, unwilling to get involved. Naomi remained still. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable. Inside, however, her thoughts were moving carefully. "They think I don't understand," she realized. Jordan tapped his fingers lightly on the table and spoke again in French, his voice dripping with amusement. "Je pari tu penses qu'on parle du menu." Another friend leaned toward him and whispered something that made the entire table laugh again. Naomi finished writing on her notepad and slowly looked up. "Have you decided on your drinks?" she asked politely. Jordan raised an eyebrow, pretending to think. Then he looked at his friends and continued speaking in French, clearly performing for them now. "Peut-être qu'on devrait commander dans un langue tu ne connais pas," he said mockingly. One of the men clapped lightly on the table. "Oui, bonne idée." Jordan turned back to Naomi with a casual shrug. "We'll start with, he said, pretending to search the menu. Then he spoke another long sentence in French, fast this time, while pointing randomly at items on the menu. The men around him laughed again. To them, this was entertainment. To Naomi, it was something else entirely. She closed her notepad slowly. For a brief moment, her eyes met Jordan's. And in that quiet second, something in her calm gaze made his smile falter, just slightly. But Jordan quickly recovered, leaning back again with the same arrogant confidence. He had no idea yet. No idea that the moment he thought was humiliating her, was quietly setting up something he would never forget. Naomi stepped away from the table with the same quiet composure she had shown all evening. To anyone watching, it looked as though nothing unusual had happened. She walked through the restaurant's warm golden lights, past the polished bar and the soft sound of piano music, her expression calm and professional. But inside, Naomi was thinking very carefully. So that's the game, she thought quietly. At the kitchen counter, she placed the drink order and waited while the bartender prepared the glasses. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored shelves behind the bar. For a brief moment, she allowed herself a small breath. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her. And it probably wouldn't be the last. When the drinks were ready, Naomi carefully arranged them on a tray and walked back toward table 12. Jordan and his friends were still laughing. As she approached, she heard Jordan speaking in French again. "Jete le dis," he said with a grin. "Elle n'a absolument aucune idée." One of his friends replied, chuckling, "C'est presque cruel, mais amusant." The table erupted in another round of quiet laughter. Naomi placed the first glass gently in front of Jordan. Then the second. Then the third. Finally, she set the tray down and looked directly at him. For a moment, the laughter at the table continued. Until Naomi spoke. But when she did, the language she used instantly changed everything. "Excusez-moi, monsieur," she said calmly, in perfect French. The words landed like a sudden crack of thunder. Jordan's smile froze. His friends stopped laughing mid-sentence. Naomi continued, her tone polite but steady. "Je voulais simplement confirmer votre commande. Vous avez demandé un Bordeaux de 2018, et vous avez mentionné que vous espérez que la service n'y comprendrait rien." The silence around the table became immediate and heavy. Jordan blinked. Naomi's French was flawless. Not hesitant. Not broken. Fluent. She continued gently, repeating another line he had said earlier. "Et vous avez aussi dit," she paused slightly, "que c'était amusant ils embauchent en importe." One of Jordan's friends shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another looked down at the table. Naomi's expression remained calm, not angry, not mocking. Just composed. Then she added quietly, still in French. "Pour être honnête, monsieur, j'ai compris chaque mot." The words hung in the air. Across the restaurant, the piano music continued softly, but at table 12, the world seemed to have gone completely still. Jordan slowly leaned forward, staring at her now as if seeing her for the first time. The confident smirk he had worn all evening had completely disappeared. And Naomi, standing there with perfect calm, simply held his gaze. For the first time that night, Jordan Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the soft clinking of silverware seemed to vanish, as if the world itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Naomi stood at the table, her posture calm, her hands steady on the tray. The words she had spoken in flawless French echoed like a challenge, a quiet but unmistakable declaration, "I understand you. I see you for who you are, *." Jordan's friends exchanged uneasy glances. The confident, teasing smirks they had worn moments ago were gone, replaced by something closer to apprehension. One of them shifted in his chair, whispering, she understood everything. Naomi's eyes never left Jordan's. She could see the flicker of confusion, the disbelief, the tiny crack forming in his carefully constructed armor of arrogance. She allowed a small, deliberate pause, letting the weight of the silence settle over the table, over the entire restaurant. And then she spoke again, this time, not just repeating his words, but dissecting them. "You said it was entertaining to hire someone who wouldn't understand a word," Naomi said, her voice low, precise, carrying over the quiet hum of the room. "You said you wanted to remind me of my place, that I was nothing but a servant. Do you hear yourself, monsieur?" Jordan's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His friends leaned in, trying to make sense of the scene, their whispered conversations dying quickly when Naomi's next words cut through the tension. I understand you perfectly. And if your idea of education, of refinement, is measured by how much you can humiliate others, then perhaps it is you who are truly lacking. Heads turned around the restaurant. Diners who had been quietly sipping wine, lost in their own worlds, now watched intently. Phones appeared as if by instinct, the red recording lights capturing every second of Jordan's growing panic. Naomi took a slow step back, her tray still poised. She allowed the tiniest smile, a spark of controlled satisfaction, just enough to unsettle him further. Perhaps you believe that power comes from money, that superiority is earned through wealth. But true strength, she said, her voice steady and unflinching, comes from knowledge, integrity, and dignity. And those, she added, glancing briefly at the observing diners, cannot be bought or mocked. For the first time that evening, Jordan looked small. His smirk, his carefully rehearsed gestures, his performative confidence, all dissolved under the weight of Naomi's calm authority. Then, without another word, Naomi set the tray down gently, turned on her heel, and walked away. Each step echoed like a declaration, this was her world, too, and no arrogance or wealth could take that away. From the corner of the room, a soft murmur of appreciation began to ripple, and the first tentative clap started, a subtle recognition that justice, sometimes, arrives in the quietest, most unexpected form. Jordan Whitmore sat frozen, humiliated, exposed, and utterly unprepared for the truth he had just confronted. And in that silence, Naomi had already won. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. What had been a quiet night of indulgence for Jordan Whitmore and his entourage had become a spectacle of reckoning. The other diners no longer nursed their wines in polite silence, their eyes were fixed on him, sharp with judgment, whispers growing into murmurs, phones raised like witnesses to the unraveling of a carefully curated image. Jordan sat frozen, his usual smirk gone, replaced with tight lines and darting eyes. He could feel the weight of every gaze, every subtle shake of a head, every half-smile that contained barely concealed amusement. He had thought that money could protect him from consequences, that his status would shield him from embarrassment. But for the first time, it wasn't working. Sir, Carlos Webb approached cautiously, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace, perhaps we should. No, you don't understand, Jordan snapped, his voice sharp but shaky. This isn't over. You'll see, it's just a misunderstanding. But everyone in the room had seen. Naomi's calm authority, her measured words, had pierced through the armor he had relied on for so long. Even Vanessa's eyes, wide and uncertain, now reflected a dawning clarity. The admiration she had shown moments ago had evaporated, in its place was recognition of the man she had truly been sitting beside all along. Outside, a soft ping echoed as yet another phone captured his humiliation. Jordan realized, slowly and with growing panic, that social media had already begun its verdict. His private moment of cruelty was now public, dissected, replayed, shared, and judged by strangers across the city, perhaps the world. Carlos swallowed hard. Sir, maybe we should just call it a night, he said, his tone careful, trying to navigate the delicate balance between fear and integrity. Jordan slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Do you all think you can humiliate me? That you can just watch me fall? But the truth was undeniable. The murmurs had become soft applause, hesitant at first, then louder, as diners recognized what had happened. Naomi hadn't only defended herself, she had revealed the hollowness behind his arrogance. Jordan Whitmore was no longer the untouchable billionaire, he was just a man exposed, human in his failings, powerless in the face of dignity and truth. Vanessa stepped back, her designer heels clicking sharply on the floor. I see who you really are now, Jordan, she said quietly, her voice firm. And I can't pretend anymore. The combination of social scrutiny, silent judgment, and Vanessa's withdrawal left him cornered. For all his wealth, for all his influence, there was no purchase that could reclaim the respect he had so casually discarded. Jordan Whitmore had faced Naomi's intelligence, courage, and composure, and now, for the first time, he faced the consequences of his arrogance in full view of everyone. The restaurant's atmosphere transformed into one of quiet triumph. Naomi's dignity remained unbroken, while Jordan sat humbled, powerless, a cautionary tale written in real time before dozens of witnesses. For him, the night had ended not with a toast, but with the bitter taste of reckoning. Naomi stepped back from the table, her hands still trembling ever so slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had surged through her in those past tense moments. Around her, the restaurant was slowly returning to its rhythm, but it was different now. The soft hum of conversation carried a new undertone, respect. Her colleagues peeked out from behind counters and kitchen doors, faces bright with awe, as if they had all witnessed something extraordinary. She sank into the quiet of the corner near the exit, letting herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. Her mind replayed every syllable she had spoken, every glance she had held, every careful inflection. It was almost surreal. One simple act of courage had shifted the entire balance of power in the room. Jordan Whitmore, who had once seemed untouchable, now looked smaller, diminished by his own hubris. Her thoughts flickered to the countless nights she had endured subtle slights and outright humiliations in workplaces far less visible than this. She remembered the whispered assumptions, the casual condescension, the way people had underestimated her for as long as she could remember. And yet, despite it all, she had persisted, studying in stolen minutes, working tirelessly, and cultivating a dignity no amount of wealth or arrogance could strip from her. Carlos approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. "Naomi, what you just did," he began, voice hesitant, "I've never seen anything like it. You didn't just defend yourself, you commanded the room." Naomi managed a small, tired smile. I couldn't let it continue," she said softly, eyes scanning the now muted chatter of diners. "It wasn't just about me, it was about showing that arrogance and cruelty don't get to dictate our worth." Her gaze fell on Vanessa, still standing by the table Jordan had abandoned, her face a mixture of shock and reflection. Naomi realized then the full impact of her actions. She hadn't just defended herself, she had forced those around her to confront their assumptions. She had become a mirror, reflecting the truth in stark, undeniable clarity. As her thoughts settled, a profound calm replaced the tension in her chest. Naomi felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, pride. Not the fleeting kind tied to achievement or recognition, but deep, unshakable pride in her own integrity. She had faced fear, faced injustice, and emerged intact, unbroken. In that quiet, she realized the night had changed more than just her immediate circumstances. It had reminded her, and everyone who had witnessed it, that courage was contagious, and that dignity could never be bought or stolen. Naomi straightened her back, lifting her chin, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself to fully feel the weight of her own power. She had faced humiliation, confrontation, and intimidation, and she had emerged victorious. And in that moment of realization, Naomi understood something profound: no amount of wealth, no display of arrogance, could ever diminish the value of a person who knew their worth. The night, with all its tension and drama, had transformed into a story she, and the world, would never forget. Naomi walked slowly toward the back exit, the soft click of her heels against the polished wooden floor echoing through the restaurant like a quiet drumbeat. Around her, the air still hummed with whispers, murmurs of disbelief, and the occasional gasp. People were no longer talking about the luxury of the restaurant, the fine wines, or the expensive attire, they were talking about her. About what she had done. About how one person's courage could shift the entire room. Her hands gripped the strap of her worn bag, feeling the familiar leather that had accompanied her through late-night study sessions and long, exhausting shifts. Naomi's mind wandered briefly to her life outside these walls, the struggles that never seemed to end, the hospital bills that loomed over her family, the nights she spent wondering if she could keep going. And yet, she had. She had made it through. Not just survived, but risen in a way that no one, least of all Jordan Whitmore, could ever have expected. Carlos appeared beside her again, his head slightly bowed. Naomi. I don't even know how to begin. Tonight, you showed all of us something we didn't expect. Something real. Naomi shook her head, a small, humble smile forming. It's not about recognition, Carlos. It's about knowing who you are, even when everyone else tries to make you feel less than. About holding on to dignity when people try to strip it from you. She paused outside, the cold Manhattan night wrapping around her like a protective cloak. The city lights reflected off the pavement, distant horns and laughter blending into a symphony of life moving forward. Naomi thought about the lesson she had learned in a way she hoped no one would ever forget. Power is not measured by wealth, by status, or by who can shout the loudest. True power comes from knowing your worth, defending it with integrity, and refusing to let fear or cruelty dictate your choices. Her eyes softened as she looked back at the restaurant one last time. She thought about the diners who had witnessed her stand, about Vanessa who had seen a side of truth she couldn't ignore, and about the countless people who might carry this story with them. Sometimes, Naomi whispered to herself, the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to be small. And with that, she stepped fully into the night, letting the weight of the evening settle behind her. In her heart, she carried more than relief, she carried empowerment, courage, and a quiet promise to herself, never let anyone define your worth. The world would always try, but the only voice that truly mattered was her own. Naomi disappeared into the pulse of the city, her head held high, leaving a story of dignity, resilience, and justice in her wake. And for anyone listening, anyone watching, the message was clear: no insult, no act of cruelty, no display of arrogance can ever diminish the soul of someone who knows their value. Stand tall. Speak truth. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small.